The first lyrics you hear on this record is step out into the front door like a ghost into the fog where no one notices the contrast of white on white. And in between the moon and you, the angels get a better view of the crumbling difference between wrong and right. What? Like that? Like when you hear that, you're like, it sets the whole thing. You're like, okay, this is heavy, right? Like Doc Brown from Back to the Future. This is heavy. Like there's something coming at you that's not flimsy at all. There's like meat to this. And then
Yeah.
it takes you the rest of the way. I mean, there's that song in particular, the lyrics in that song still blow me away to this day. Hey everybody, Ronny Criss here. I'm Waxing on Wax. Welcome to our Vinyl Conversations, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Mr. Joe Hajek, singer-songwriter, graphic designer, and long-time friend. Joe, how you doing, my friend?
Singer-songwriter. I'm good. I'm glad you still tack that label on my name, but
It's
good
true.
to
You
be
do
here
it.
with you.
Me and Joe go back a long time. Anybody that's been watching Wax on Wax, we have a lot of different people that we will be talking to, and some of those folks are people I work with, people I write with, people, all people I care about, and some people that I've known for a really long time. And Joe is one of those folks. Me and Joe met so many years ago when we were just
So I don't,
puppies.
yeah, I don't know how many.
Long time ago. So Joe, but the pleasure of Waxing on Wax is we get a chance to talk about vinyl records, and in particular we get to talk about albums we love. And Joe and I have a unique and distinctive love for the great record that is Counting Crows, August and Everything After. This is a big one. This is a big
Oh
one for
yeah.
me and Joe.
Yep. Yep.
Now,
Yep.
anybody who's aware of this record and understands its timing and all that knows that most people experience this record as a CD. This was not something that was this is not something that was readily available on vinyl at the time. Most people bought this as a CD. So bringing this into the vinyl conversation is obviously bringing it into a conversation it's not originally most well known for. But the original vinyl, which is expensive and hard to find, and the reissue, which is not as expensive and definitely a little
Still
easier
hard
to
to find.
find, still a little hard to find. It's still an amazing experience to listen to this record, and we're excited to talk about it. Not only because of the vinyl that is available to all of you, but also because we love this record, and this record needs to be talked about. So, a couple things. Bird's eye view of this big record. This record was released in September 14, 1993. Did you know that, Joe?
Yeah.
September
Yeah.
14th. I don't know.
I
That's
didn't know the exact date, but I remember it was after August intentionally, I believe.
that's really great. That is a great point, Joe. That is wonderful.
I had to make sure because I was looking at a calendar for a second. Yeah,
That's
September.
probably lost on a lot of people that it was released in September. That's awesome, man. It was recorded February through June. It was recorded February through June 1993 in Los Angeles. It's on Geffen Records. This format, as I said, this is the vinyl format. This is the reissue, which I'm going to talk about here in just a little bit. It was released officially in 1993. It's also sometimes listed as released in 1994. I think it's got most of its attention in 1994, not necessarily in September of 93. It's a rock pop or folk rock or alternative rock record. It's been mentioned in all of those forms. It was produced by, do you know, Joe? I know you know.
T-Bone Burnett.
T-Bone Burnett, produced by T-Bone Burnett. It was actually recorded by Pat McCarthy and mixed by Pat McCarthy and Scott Litt. I believe that's right. And executively produced by Gary Gersh. We don't know those folks, but other than T-Bone.
Hey.
And yeah, it's entire. This is an original album. This is the debut album of Counting Crows, one of our favorite bands, and one of the most influential bands of the '90s by far. I mean, they influenced us in unbelievable ways, but obviously, I think their effect, this in particular, this album and the first single, "Mr. Jones," which we'll talk more about in a little bit, and how it came onto the scene. Speaks volumes to the power of this record and what they were doing at the time. And it's just really exciting to be able to talk about this record, because I know we both love it, and I think a lot of people out there love it. A lot of you listening probably love this record. Anybody that's anywhere relatively close to our ages
Yeah.
probably loves this record. If you are listening and you are under a certain age, you might not be as into this record, but you might not have
I
clicked.
don't know where that cutoff is, but
I
yeah.
don't either. But let's talk about the vinyl.
I don't want to know. Yeah.
Let's talk about the vinyl real quick. So the version that I have is the reissue. It's actually it is you take a look at this here. This was actually I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this. Let's see.
There it is.
See that? There it is.
Kinda.
It's probably backwards on the video, but it's just made in the Netherlands. Okay, so this is an import. My version.
That's where it was pressed?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
That's where it was pressed.
Interesting.
So I'm going to take a pause here, and then I'm going to cut it into it. Let's see here. Yeah, my version is actually it's a 2 LP set. So anyone who's used to this record from the CD just knows it as a CD, and all the songs are in one disc. They decided when they pressed this record to do it on 2 discs, 2 LPs. The other cool thing about this record that a lot of people might not know is this is actually cut so that it actually plays at the 45 speed. So this is, if you were to play this on your normal record speed, it would actually be super slowed down. And when I first opened this, I did not realize that. And I was super excited. Joe, I was so excited to play this record for the first time.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Was the first one cut that way, or do you know why they chose to do this one that way?
That's a great question. I think
for next week. That'll be next part 2.
I do not believe the original album. I could be wrong. I'm going by Discogs here. I'm on Discogs. I believe the 1993 LP release was not, and I don't think it's a double. It's a single LP, and it's at 33. Yeah. And the quality's not as good, probably.
Yeah.
Why would you put it on 2 LPs at 45? Is it has everything to do with the quality of the sound. And I believe the thinking is, and anybody who knows albums can, in the comments, totally obliterate what I'm about to say. But I think that at the 45 speed and giving the actual LP, so less songs on each side, because if you do the 2 LPs, it's almost like 3 songs on each side. It gives you room to create a better representation of the digital sound that the album has attached to it from the time period that it was released. And therefore, it sounds better. And I can tell you this, when I switched it to 45 and I played it again where it was in the speed that it was supposed to be, it was significantly louder than the other albums that I was playing, like Obvious. I actually had to turn it down initially because I was like, whoa, this is louder than I'm used to listening to my records at.
More depth or just louder in general?
It was just louder.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why, other than something to do with
louder.
that. But I think if you sat and listened to it, it was probably had a little bit more. I mean, I could tell there was definitely some depth to the listening process. But yeah, it's a very cool thing that it was actually, I mean, it caught me off guard, that's for sure. I can tell you that. This version here was released in 2017. So relatively new release. And again, it's on 2 discs. So there's a side A, a side B, a side C, and a side D. Um,
That'd be like 25-year anniversary ish,
Pretty close, pretty close. Um,
almost.
yeah, so it's this particular version, it's Universal International Music BV Gerrit van der Veenlaan. It's in Baarn, Baarn, Netherlands, is where it was created and shipped. So it's a wonderful. It's a gatefold, so it opens up like this, which is really cool, and the light is super bright. But you have all the lyrics here, and you have this great photo.
Yeah,
I think
that's from the booklet. That's got to be for. I remember that in the CD booklet.
Yeah, it's from the booklet. The other thing that I think we should point out too, which has always been a part of conversation in terms of the Counting Crows, and in particular this album, is that if you look at the actual art of the cover, yes, everybody notices the scripted Counting Crows and August Everything After, but faintly on the back, or excuse me, behind all of that, faintly on the cover and even on the back. What is it, Joe? What is all that written there?
The lyrics to August and Everything After the song that was never on the record.
Yeah, right. Which I think is an amazingly unique little tidbit to this whole album.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not familiar, August and Everything After is a song written by the Counting Crows, and I think originally thought was going to be on this record. At least there was a consideration that it would be on this record, and then at some point
it was going to be on the second record then too.
Well, because, I think at some point then they decided we're going to do this cool thing where we will put a song that exists. We will make that the title of the next record and put it on that record.
Right. Yeah.
So August and Everything
It's going to be a trend or something.
Yeah, and then they gave up on it on the second record.
I think they never got a good recording of it or something, right? And
they didn't completely like the recording. If I remember from the there was some kind of documentary or some kind of thing about it, and this is probably when they were re-releasing this.
I think when they recorded the song, like last year, 2 years ago, they recorded the song as
for Spotify
or for Amazon or for one of the streaming services. All of them were affiliated. Yeah. So I think the main thing they did with that was to kind of finally feel like they could get a good production of it. But there was good live leaks of the song prior to that were just basically piano and vocal.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that they had a song, maybe it would have been on the record. Then they're like, you know what, we're going to title the record this, and we're going to save the song for the next record.
Yep.
And then they had this idea for a short period of time. We'll do that for every record. So hypothetically, the second record, Recovering the Satellites, that song, which is on the second record, should have been held off that record and saved for the third record. But they decided that was not a good idea by the second record, and they didn't do that.
I think that was smart. I think they saw that as probably feeling a little gimmicky after a while, because then you're forced to do that, and then it's not as natural, right?
Yeah, you get pushed into that corner.
Yeah.
And Recovering the Satellites belongs on that second record.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like you're basically, you like you said, you're painting yourself in a corner that you don't need to do that.
Yeah, because that song would have never worked on the next album.
No. Yeah, what would they have titled? What would they? Yeah, This Desert Life is what they would have titled the second album, and had it,
Oh yeah.
Or that's the third album.
Or wait, no. I don't know.
It's confusing.
Yeah, that's probably why they stopped the idea, because they're like, hold on. The first one was accidental and a cool story, which you don't get that kind of story. You know how hard it was to find out what the heck those lyrics meant back then?
Yeah.
Oh God,
well, and I think that's a unique part of the whole story of the album is for people who are super into the band, and people get kind of fanatical when they really love something. they're like, what's all this written on this album? And they're like, this doesn't match any of the lyrics of,
Right.
they get intimately aware of the lyrics on the record, and they're like, none of this is on the record, so what is this thing?
Yeah,
And
you look at it, and I remember thinking that it just must be lyrics to the songs, and it took a minute to start diving in and realizing it wasn't, because the assumption was there where I wasn't really trying to read it right away. You were kind of seeing words here and there, but once you realized it was that what were you going to do? I mean, when did you start getting on AOL? I couldn't search. You couldn't find out any info on that
yeah, I mean,
back then.
I never dived in it that deep,
Right.
so it's like, yeah, I never dived in it that deep, so I don't know if it's I learned about it through whether social media or like just like
The
when it came
MySpace
out.
days.
Not even that, like when they redid the song, that's when I first learned about it.
Oh, yeah.
So
I might have been pretty obsessive because I do remember, I don't know if it was back in school searching of what the lyrics were. There was always like rumors in chat rooms on things of like what it would be. You could find like a Counting Crows like fan site that just had basically an ongoing feed, almost a Reddit of just Counting Crows or something
yeah,
of people just chatting about like live shows, bootlegs, and the whole thing was Counting Crows always recorded every concert they did. So you could always find somebody who made the bootleg cassettes and would ship them out.
yeah. This is a
Definitely.
visual. This is
Yeah,
a visual of the actual vinyl record, so you can see that. This is side A. So this has Round Here in Omaha, and sorry, my light makes that bad, but Round Here in Omaha and Mr. Jones, and on this side it has Perfect Blue Buildings, Anna Begins, and Time and Time Again, and then of course the rest of the songs are on the other LP. So what is with all that said about the record itself, and the other thing to note about this is it's actually 180 gram, so it's sturdier than a lot of records. I mean, this is kind of the thing that they're doing nowadays. Um, they say that it's a better sound, which I think it is. I mean, I think I notice a little bit better sound when I listen to the 180 grams records that I have.
Yeah. Well, they definitely like they just feel like when you have a thinner pressing, you feel the flimsiness of it. Those feel so sturdy, like the sound must be. There's no warping.
It doesn't warp as easy, that's for sure.
But that's science. I don't know. I'm just saying from what I guess, but
Just riff.
sounds good.
Yeah, so I mean, those are sort of the basics of the actual vinyl itself. It's like I said, it's a beautiful. I love the gatefold. This particular pressing. Um, I love that I have this record. I mean, I can't. This goes to what this record means to the two of us, but um, it's amazing. It's amazing that someone could write it, that they could create an album with so many incredible songs on it. Like, and we'll talk more about that here in a second. It will, as a transition, like critically, like what did the record, when this record was released in 1993, Joe, like what were they saying about
The main thing well, and this stood out to me. Rolling Stone pointed out the one quote I found, and it's hard to find a digital review at a time when there weren't digital reviews. So you find these little snippets of kind of quotes, almost like a movie trailer, where they just give you that little like morsel
it? Morsel.
of review. And Rolling Stone had said the lyricist discovery of the year is Adam Duritz. And what I think is pretty cool about that is, when was the last time you heard anybody talking about a lyricist? I think now,
Even now,
you
after the fact.
right now you what did like you don't hear a lot of songwriters described as lyricists because it sounds almost like high end art, or like almost maybe it sounds a bit lofty or a bit full. But I think it was true to that style he was writing. You think of Bob Dylan as a lyricist, you think of somebody that's saying something beyond like a rhyme. It wasn't like it's not a songwriter. It's not a songwriter as a craft of songwriting. It's poetry with music backing it up is what like a lyricist means.
It's zeroing in on the lyric itself. Like,
right.
You can call someone a great songwriter. Like everybody,
right,
under the sun,
right, yeah,
calls Tom Petty or some of these other folks a great songwriter. And I think they're great lyricists too. But when someone actually makes it a point to point out that you're a lyricist, it's like they're like really trying to make you understand this person is like going in a deep level on the lyric part of that craft.
Yeah,
which I think is really cool.
That quote was December 93. By June of 94, so 6 months later, the biggest new band in America was Rolling Stone's headline, I think cover. And the quote I always see from that time, for some reason, whenever people reference this album, they bring up how David Letterman announced that if you don't have a copy of this album, there's something wrong with you. That was his lead in to them playing. And I believe he often had them back. He was, every time they released a record, he would have them on like 2 nights in a row, which was a big deal of like late night talk show hosts at that time. And that's what I grew up going to bed to, was like talk shows or Saturday Night Live on. And so Counting Crows were a big part of that with Letterman and with SNL, with their performance around here. I mean, to have that as a single, to have that as a song you perform live on national TV.
Well, that's a good point. I think that's a good thing to bring up, and that'll transition us a little bit into the next segment. But that SNL performance around here is like a pivotal 90s moment. Like it is and the funny thing is if anybody's familiar with SNL and watches SNL, I mean, I don't watch it anymore, but I don't find it very funny anymore, but that's my part there. I might cut that out, but but yeah, it's they always have
time to watch it, I feel like.
Yeah, that's that too. But they have musical guests, and the musical guests usually play 2 songs.
Right.
Well, the first song they played was Mr. Jones.
Yep.
And then they had more skits from SNL, and then they get their second shot and they play Round Here. And Round Here was the song that everybody remembers. That like,
oh yeah.
The second song was the one that flipped everybody out.
That's usually the afterthought. That's usually that everyone's asleep. It's not the single at the time. It's the next
and I
single,
don't remember if it was single at the time or not. Like
I mean, with most bands now that are on there, their single, I think that comes first,
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know.
And it could be. It might have actually launched Round Here being the next single quicker than. I would have to really know the history, and I don't. I just know my experience of it as a kid, like experiencing it. And I can't tell you if Round Here was a single yet or not. I know if it wasn't, it was soon to be, because it was the next big single. It was Mr. Jones and then Round Here. But like, that's the other thing about that song, which is Round Here is an obvious first single, and it was a big statement, and it caught everybody's attention because it was different than what was going on at the time. And it had this emotion. It was uplifting, and it was not uplift. I don't know if it was uplifting. It was it was upbeat, and it was energetic, and it sounded different than what was on the radio at the time, and it made people notice this is a cool band and this is an interesting sound.
Yeah.
Right? Then their second single is this melodramatic, poetic, almost long form story that is just dramatic in every level. And like, that's just not something that normally becomes a huge hit. And around here,
Right.
it was probably played more on MTV than Mr. Jones.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I don't know if that's
I
true or
remember that
not. I could
video
be wrong,
vividly.
but
I
I
remember
remember,
both videos pretty vividly, but yeah, the walking on the train tracks with the shredded up capris, I think was the Adam Duritz I knew with like the combat boots, on the train tracks during the
yeah.
Round Here video.
But like that song, I just remember that being such a huge thing on MTV, and anyone who heard that song, and this is not this is not an upbeat song. This is not a song that's like about like all sorts of like happy-go-lucky anything. This is like this super
Right.
poetic, melodramatic, emotional song. Some people criticize the Counting Crow, like the big thing if you're like kind of a Counting Crows hater or just somebody who's not really into them, as you say, he sounds like he's whining.
Right.
And that was the first time where, it really leaned in on the whine a little bit, but like in this beautiful way. I mean, we love the band, so like I don't find it whining at all. I love the way that he is emotive and his emotion in the songs. But yeah, I mean, I think, but it was huge. It was huge. That song was so big, and it's still so big. I think it's still a pivotal song on the record.
Mm-hmm.
I'll get to that later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I will never forget the combination of those two singles. Like, they were such moments as a young person. 93, I guess I would have been 14 years old. So I'm just in high school, just entering high school, something like that. If that's correct. Does that sound right, Joe? We're the same age.
Yeah. I think when they came out, yes, but then by the time it was big, it was like middle of freshman, the sophomore year or something
I think
around
it's
that time.
sophomore.
Yeah.
My big memory of this album, this belongs in a different segment, but we'll kick into personal impact of this record. Let's kick right into that.
Yeah.
So my big memory of this record, and will forever be a memory of this record. I was aware of it before this memory, but because I saw it in MTV, and I was like, okay, this is an interesting band, and I was kind of like starting to. I mean, I actually had the album. I think I had gotten the album, so I was aware of the album. I had listened to it a few times and kind of was starting to get into it. I liked it, right? But this is a summer before sophomore year of high school, and I'm going to this house party somewhere. I don't know whose house it was, but I remember being like, every time I would enter the house, like, so stuff was outside in the parking lot, or what, a parking lot. Stuff was outside in the driveway, in the back. People were drinking beers and hanging out, and and all this stuff, right? And every time you go into the actual house, they were playing this record, which is kind of weird because it's a party, right?
Right.
Like, this
Like a
record
big
is
party
not
record.
necessarily like super uplifting in that sense. Like, it's not a party down record, but this
No.
record was like playing all the time. So like it was there. And then of course, like, this girl, like, all of a sudden was like super into me. And so then there was like all this stuff happening like during this party, and this record's there. And I remember like kissing this girl, and then
Oh
eventually,
boy.
yeah, right, and then leaving the party. And I didn't leave with the girl. I mean, I'm going in the sophomore year of high school, but then I go home, and then I put the record on at home, like in my room, because it was like this. It just was all about this moment, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
it just sort of solidified like you being at the age where like romance and attraction and trying to figure out who you are, all of this like coalesced in this sort of evening, which I know this is a lot to put on this video.
No. No. No.
That's
No.
my
No.
personal
There's
impact.
it's good stuff. Yeah.
That's my. So
That's
what is your personal impact of this record? I know it's pretty deep.
There's so many layers to that, I think, because
Right.
I would say the first is more of the casual intro, coming out of middle school and being really into just general and only exposed to general pop music on one side, like with my friends at school and school dances. And on the other side, having older brothers who, I listened to Led Zeppelin, or they listened to more Led Zeppelin, or one of my older brothers listened to like Grateful Dead, and I wasn't really into that as much either. And it kind of met in the middle. My brother took me to a CD store because that was the big thing. You go to, like, it was almost like baseball card stores or something at the time, baseball card shops at the time. It was in Naperville, near, I think,
Oh.
North Central College. There was this little
Tidbit. Joe and I are both from the Chicagoland area. We
oh
grew up in
yeah,
the Chicagoland
good
area,
thing to
so
note.
I know exactly what he's talking
Well,
about.
and we should probably say we are both in the Nashville area. Did you already say that?
No, I didn't. We both live here near Nashville. I live in
But
Nashville. He lives near Nashville.
and that all, man, that this is like what we should have said in the start, right? Like, I moved here because I came to your wedding here, and
That's true.
we decided to move because I had known Ronnie through college, and we both grew up around Chicago, and then played music, played guitar. He taught me guitar on a lot of levels in college because I was just basically thumbing around on an acoustic, teaching myself through from high school through college. And so yeah, but that guitar, the whole way that ties together is that guitar I was thumbing around on. The whole reason I had the guitar from high school is I was so kind of blown away by the August and Everything After, and the record, both lyrically and musically, because it was simple enough for me to learn.
Well,
You know,
I think if I remember you telling me once, and this will tie into I think what you were saying, is your brother took you to the CD store and you
hmm
were looking for something to buy or just something you're
yeah,
interested in, and you saw, imagine it from the CD perspective, but you saw this
hmm
album, this cover,
yeah,
thought it was cool, and I think you had possibly had
and
heard one of the songs,
I
so
heard Mr. Jones, yeah.
you knew Mr. Jones, and you're like, okay, so I'm going to buy this. I want to see what this is all about.
Yeah.
And
So,
you took it home,
yep.
and then what happened?
Man, how did you even remember? That's very specific, and that is very
Because you
true.
told me, I
So
remember.
my brother took me, yeah, well, because the record means enough where even someone else's story resonates, right?
Yep.
So I went into that record store, saw, and I bought a lot of stuff based on cover art, because both being a visual guy, artist, whatever you want to call it, and like you as well, it's what drew us to certain records. You could tell from the cover if you were going to like it sometimes, and maybe you're wrong sometimes, but
That's
I
true.
remember seeing that cover and knowing that one song. And most CDs you would buy, this is my first CD I ever bought, but most CDs, like throughout my life, when I would buy a CD, it would be because I knew one or two songs from the radio and I hoped the rest was good. There was no way for me to really know unless you went to a Borders and you played it where they
Yeah,
could sample them or something.
that's our growing up experience. Yep.
Right. So you'd buy it and you'd hope. And I remember buying that album and that CD and bringing it back. And the first CD I ever bought, first time putting it in this new CD player I had, and knowing Mr. Jones, but starting off with Round Here and not knowing if something was busted, because the song didn't start for 11 seconds, I think, before anything comes in. Um, it just was mesmerizing, I think, because you didn't hear anything like it. It was whiny enough to tie into the angst of my youth and that time of my life, I guess. But it was lyrically just, and so I always, I found myself always writing poems, writing songs, what I thought were songs. But that album made me think, man, you can just write poems and tie them into some simply, not simple, I'm not trying to minimize it, but
Well, you just tied into
simply,
music, it's chord progressions.
yeah, the musical structure was familiar enough and easy enough to learn and get a guitar. And I remember learning that whole record. You had to get a chord book to learn it. you had to go to one of the bookstores or music stores and buy the chord book and learn the structure of it. So yeah, that album drew me to writing songs. It drew me to just really, I mean, that's when you would buy an album and you'd read the booklet. You'd hope that they had the lyrics in the booklet, so you would like read along as it played. So yeah, it definitely had an impact, and that impact just carried. I mean, you knew every new record that was coming after that, you were just waiting for that record to come out, the next record to come out.
Yeah, I think after I had my sort of teenage, sort of memorable, emotional moment with the record in terms of like
make out session,
/ attaching it to, you know, my new life of being quite fond of females.
Yeah. Well, that was a transition. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you always are aware of them, but then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, there's a connection here.
Right.
But anyway, when I got that out of the way, and then I just started really diving into the record and listening to the record, and this is speaking to what you're saying, really connecting with the lyrics, connecting with the musical sounds, realizing that there is a, you know, the folky rock, elements of country, elements of what I would eventually discover has elements of like Bob Dylan. At the time, I wasn't into Bob Dylan, so I didn't really, I didn't know that. But like these really important musical forms and sounds and styles that had this effect that was really impactful on me, like was coming through this record. And their ability to, I mean, the reason that is because those guys were such huge fans of all of that. And that's why they wrote music the way they did, right? They basically were a bunch of guys who loved the band and loved Bob Dylan and loved Big Star and loved, I mean, countless other bands. I mean, they later on in life do a cover of Amy by Pure Prairie League, which is, you know, I mean, like they loved all these old classic bands and albums and music that all have this roots element to it. And then you mix that with an incredible lyricist, which you mentioned before, in Adam Duritz, who was able to just craft words that like every one of us in the 90s was just like, I mean, this is the other thing about this record, which a lot of people, I don't know, I want to believe that younger folks have versions of this.
Right.
I'm going to be honest with you.
I don't know if it's the same experience.
I haven't heard any new band that has quite the kind of lyrical attack that they did in terms of.
Right. Even if you do, it's not like this record had that and it somehow reached like a pop mainstream level with that. When you hear it back now, it's like the fact that it reached the fact that it had
it was so overtly poetic yet still somehow commercial. Like that just doesn't happen.
Right. Like I mean, you and I have probably shared some very poetic and very amazing records that are more current time-wise, but the reach of them, I mean, there's so much music, so much saturation, and so much like attention span of like Spotify and whatever else we're using to just hear a song and not experience an album. And we say that, and we grew up on CDs, which were, you could skip them, you could, you know, you didn't have to listen through. Like people criticize CDs as being that same way, but I still listen, you know, soup to nuts. I still listen front to back on those, straight through. And I'm sure you did too. It's not like you skipped ahead too much or jumped around.
Well, I never skipped around on this record.
Right.
And here's the thing. Counting, you said this was the first one you ever bought. It's not the first one I ever bought. I think actually the first record the first CD I ever bought was New Miserable Experience by Gin Blossoms.
That's a good one though.
It is a good one.
But man, you're more advanced than me. Yeah, you got on the CD wagon.
But and then I think I had like 3 or 4 other CDs before I got this CD. But now, New Miserable Experience by Gin Blossoms, I pretty consistently listened to that from beginning to end because it was also the first one I ever bought, and so it was the only thing I had. But like, as you buy more CDs, some of them you're like, oh, well, I skipped the song. I'll skip the song. I'll listen to these 3 and I'll skip that one, right? I never once skipped a song on this record ever in my life.
Yeah.
I still to this day don't ever skip a song on this record. Like, how does that happen? That's not common.
Yeah. I mean, and you occasionally will go to, like, because you have the ease of doing it, you'll go to a specific song. But a lot of times when I want to play it through, I don't usually start it from a random song unless it's on a playlist and it shuffles into it. For some reason, this record, and a lot of the records, I'll do that way. Mostly, I mean, most definitely the first 2 records I play A to B straight through at any given time that I listen to them. And you go through those lulls where you don't, but when you come back to them, you always play it through. I don't know if that's just because that's how we experienced them in the beginning, but yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing about this record too is, the sequencing of the songs is a huge thing. And I think what adds to why the album works the way that it does. The fact that it starts with Round Here is so pivotal to me.
Yeah.
Like, I think the record cannot, obviously it's a historic record. So like, we can't hear it any other way, but like, if it didn't start with that song, like, it would never have been right. It had to start with that song.
Yeah.
For you to listen, and then again, like you said, for them to say, okay, we're going to also make you wait 10 seconds before the music starts. Like, what's that?
Nobody would have done that. Nobody would still.
Like, why? That's
how
such
did
a
they
weird
allow
thing.
Well, I think
because
that's
is
how
it
you
necessary?
knew, right? I think
I don't
that's
know
how
if
you
it's
knew that
necessary.
they had the full, somehow had full control. Like, how did they even get that then at a time? Maybe because that was where things were shifting. But yeah, no label. I think that was what was endearing about it all, is like, you knew that they were getting everything put out the way they wanted it to be
Which doesn't happen
experienced.
often, especially back then.
Right.
Especially
So
back then with the major labels.
and you felt like if you skipped around on that, you were like, man, there's a reason they put these songs together in this order. I should probably hear them in this order. And that's what changed the way I listened to music from that point on. When I would get an album, if a band didn't do that, if I felt like the band had that structure where number 3 is the pop hit, number 3 is always the radio song, number 1 was like the uplifting, like, intro track, and you always knew if you went to the last song, it was like maybe a piano ballad. And somehow what we're on right now, no one can hear, but we're listening to the record as we talk about it. When you close out with like what almost would have been an opener on most records, A Murder of One, which is like this up, like, it sounds like an intro to the album. And somehow that closes the album, when Round Here sounds like it could have closed the album. But now, knowing it the way we know it, it makes so much sense at the beginning.
It's so perfect.
Yeah.
But like, you're right. If you don't know these songs and someone just played them for you once and said, now tell me the order of the record, you might not have done what they did.
Right.
But with that being said,
oh yeah, I would imagine
later, 25
it's got to be
years later.
similar, right? And it's got to be even similar to probably Adam Duritz himself, I would imagine, although he always reinvented the song live. But that you'd hear Bob Dylan talk about how he doesn't know that guy anymore when he'd talk about himself in the past, himself in the 60s. Yeah. And it's Bob Dylan being Bob Dylan, but it's also like, I think that's true to anybody. Like, you think back to you at 20, you feel like you have a memory of someone else. And I wonder if that's the same even with Counting Crows, with Adam Duritz, with his songwriting, or if that the way they perform that song still with that level of emotion, somehow he's allowed himself to carry that through,
Yeah.
Because that song does have that level of like, it could mean almost, it could be interpreted in so many different directions. So it allows it to always be current.
Well, that's
You
the
know?
thing. There's not a thing in that song that ties it to a time period.
Right. Yeah.
It only ties it to emotion. And it ties it to the human experience, right? Which everybody goes through. They have their own flavor, their own version. But like every single person deals with wanting to figure out who they are, wanting to find that thing they're missing. Um, they deal
Yeah.
they deal with experiences, which I think he's using this beautiful language to express, like, you know, like
Yeah.
stepping out into the world and not feeling like you're noticed.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
really, like if you said to me, sometimes I step out into the world and I don't feel noticed by the world. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, so you feel like you step out into the front door like a ghost into the fog, where the contrast of white, like, like
Right.
what an amazing, beautiful picture of an idea of that. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's just incredible. Now we love this band, so like we think that's really great. Somebody else might, I don't know, they might not think that's that cool, but I don't know how you don't think that that's pretty cool. That's such a great, and
Yeah.
it's and then if you ask Adam, he will tell you, people like to throw the whole poet thing at Adam like he's this great poet, and he will probably tell you, well, that's a song lyric, that's not a poem, because poetry is a whole nother
Mm-hmm.
can of worms.
Yeah.
But it's so connected to this idea of what poetry is, like that you are so visual with your words, and you
Mm-hmm.
have this ability to create these metaphors and these like new ways of looking at very simple or complicated human experiences, right? That's what poetry has a way of doing. And his lyrics are just always so tied to that in a way that
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of every songwriter does it a little bit. Some are songwriters are more excuse me. Every songwriter does it a little bit. Some songwriters are more literal than others. But like his ability to walk that line between the poet and the lyricist and the songwriter is just such a really cool thing. And I think he was so, and I could be completely wrong, but I feel like I know this from interviews. They were so inspired by Bob Dylan that like he wanted to be that good.
Mm-hmm.
He really wanted to be that good at writing lyrics. And it
But it never felt like he was trying too hard with it. It always felt like
natural.
you weren't listening to someone and thinking like this guy's trying to be Bob Dylan ever. And maybe because we didn't know Bob Dylan to the level that we might say we do now.
No, but
Um,
nobody. No, but you're right. I mean, we might not have noticed that as teenagers, but I'm
right.
not a teenager anymore, and I have almost every Bob Dylan record you can think of,
Yep.
and I don't listen to the Counting Crows and hear the Bob Dylan
Right. No. Yeah.
because they were themselves.
Yep.